Produced by Podcast Architects.
Welcome, friends, Romans, countrymen, fellow civil engineers. Welcome to the Get Better at Business podcast. I am joined today by Jose De Leon, who I am really hoping is a much better civil engineer than I was whenever I was in college. And so thanks for coming on the program. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Travis. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So remind me, so I know we both went to A&M. Remind me what year you were?
Yeah, I'm class of 06.
Okay.
But I did 2 victory laps, so.
Well, if you're it is very possible that I was, one of the people that was not paying nearly close enough attention in some of the same classes that you took whenever I was there. So I'm 05, so I was there a little bit ahead of you, but got started in the engineering game a little bit later. And so I have not engineered anything since I left college, and that's a really good thing for, me and society at large. So whenever you got into civil engineering, what was your aspiration? Like, people that were mechanical engineers or aerospace engineers, they have like a good story of like, oh man, like I was just super into cars or I was super into airplanes. And it's like civil engineers, it's like super into land development whenever I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, what was your attraction to that discipline?
Yeah, actually, so I went to A&M wanting to get into the mechanical engineering department. And in my A&M application, they asked you for a second option for another school. And so I chose physics. So when I went to A&M, I went straight into the physics department, and I didn't want to do physics. I talked to my advisor, and he said, don't worry about it. You're just doing your technical electives right now, and you're early on, so it really doesn't matter. What matters is that you take the classes. So I said, okay. Little did I know that physics at A&M is a very prestigious program, so they require you to take a minimum of 3 honors per semester, honors classes. So I took a few honors classes. That was honors calculus, honors physics, and I ended up just not doing very well that first semester. So then I couldn't transfer into the mechanical engineering department because the minimum GPA to transfer was like 3.4 at the time. It was pretty high. And so my advisor suggested to go talk to civil. And I started talking to the civil department. And in contrast to the mechanical engineering department, it just seemed like all the professors on the civil side and the advisors really enjoyed what they were doing. And a few of them even said, I used to be a mechanical. I hated it. And now I'm a civil and I love it. It's like, okay.
That's right.
So that's kind of what's...
Yeah. One of the great things about being civil engineers, the stuff that, civil engineers try to, it's like our stuff stays still, and so it doesn't move around. And so it makes it a little easier to, get a handle on. But anyway, so you found yourself in there, and did you really gravitate toward it? Did you like it?
I did.
As well as you thought you would? Yeah.
Yeah. Once I was in it, I really enjoyed it. And then I took some time off, and that's why it took me a little bit longer to graduate, but went to go work for a civil engineering firm in Montana. And that really solidified that this is what I wanted to do with my life.
Well, and so what was the nature of the work you were doing up in Montana?
Yeah, so we were, that particular company, they had a contract with Lowe's home improvement centers across the United States. And so they were doing the retail centers, all the civil engineering and the site feasibility studies and drainage and all of that. Not just for the retail centers, but also for the flatbed distribution centers. And I really enjoyed it. That was a great experience.
Yeah. And so what happened to you right after? So, I certainly hope for all of your customers that you graduated. And,
yep, I did.
Assuming that happened, what happened next?
Yeah, so I went back to A&M to finish my degree, and I helped open the office in College Station for that same company. But then they got into a lawsuit, not at a fault of their own. They were just brought into it, and they had to defend themselves, and they weren't able to hire me when I did graduate. So I ended up moving to Houston, working for one of their competitors, doing Lowe's again, Lowe's and Walmarts. So that's kind of how I started.
What did it feel like? Was it, working on kind of some of these bigger things that I would expect, a little bit of, copy and paste to a certain extent, where there's like, one Lowe's is not too unlike another. And so I guess, what did you find exciting about it? What did you find interesting
Yeah, I
about the book?
think. I think one, every site was different. So every
Mm-hmm.
jurisdiction, every site had its own challenges. So even though it was
Mm-hmm.
the same building footprint or very similar one, there was lots of ways to design the site.
Yeah.
So that was exciting. And then second, um, once I designed it, it got built, and you got to walk the site. And hey, I told them where to put that parking stall or that curb or that entrance, or all these people have no clue what went into the design of this thing. But it was really, that was exciting. And then um, yeah, I think just civil engineering in general is all about the built environment. It's the things that people use, and don't really put a lot of thought into it, and don't
Well,
realize.
it's one of those things that is, one of those things that really just makes the world go round, that, just kind of happens in the background. And it's like, if you do a great job, then, the only time that people notice what your profession does is whenever you don't do it well,
Yep, that's
where
right.
it's like, there's, as we're, my wife and I are sitting around, like thinking about what do we want to do with this house, or we want to, make some improvement. We never sit there and think, God dang, this sewer system is designed so perfectly. Man, I'm
Yeah,
so glad that,
that's exactly right.
it's like,
Most
man,
people
the
flush the
grade
toilet.
on this,
Yeah.
the grade on this driveway is just perfect, but it's, when it doesn't go right, people do notice. And so
Yeah.
it's, the, well, I'm guessing so you get into this, you get into this and you have a path forward, I would assume, of like, hey man, you can just double down and just, engineer the crap out of stuff for the rest of your career. And I mean, obviously that you decided maybe to take the road less traveled. Did you consider that it was just like, what, man, I'm enjoying my work. I like what I do. Maybe I should just, like, this is a good path. I want to stick with it. Did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was enjoying it, and there's so many. Civil engineering is pretty diverse as far as the areas of expertise that you can dive into. I mean, there's ocean engineering, there's uh, geotechnical, all of those fall under civil. So you can really branch out and find a niche, or stay broad and enjoy the diversity of all the different types of projects that are out there.
But what was the thing that kind of started your entrepreneurial itch, got you thinking
So
about, maybe I could
yeah,
just, branch out in that way?
yeah. So for me, I think I never set a goal for myself to, or even had the desire to go start my own company. I was like, oh, I want to be my own boss. I want to start my own company. That wasn't really in my mindset or in my framework. It was more, I was placed in different positions over the years and in different roles that made me question, why am I in this role right now? But seeing this side of the business that my counterparts don't typically get to see, and just being pushed in all sorts of different areas. That by around 2014, I'd been in the industry now for 6 years plus, and I had an old engineer mentor of mine approach me, and he said, "Jose, I'm semi-retired now, but I have a project that it would be a good opportunity for somebody to start their own company." And wink, wink. And I said, "Hey, that's great, but my wife's pregnant. We just bought a house. Yes, we're debt free, but I have no savings or anything to start the company with." And so he said, "Well, you need to start giving it some thought." And he kept pressing me and pressing me, and I talked to several people, mentors and friends and people that knew me that could speak into my life, and I started praying about it, as did they, and some doors opened up, and it felt like it was the right decision to make. So I took a step of faith and started the company.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about your mentor though. Like, this guy that's a civil engineer, was he an entrepreneur as well, that had his
Yeah,
own thing
so
going, or was he,
yeah,
just
so
what
he
was he like?
yeah, so his name is Jim Hostetler.
Mhm.
And he had an engineering firm at one time here in Houston. Um, Jim is now in his early 80s, um, but his focus was mainly on wastewater treatment. He was one of the main wastewater guys in the Houston area. So he designed a lot of the wastewater treatment plants for the city of Sugar Land, which is a suburb of Houston, several of the wastewater treatment plants around the Houston area. Um, and then he eventually diversified and started landing bigger projects. And so his company grew quite a bit in the 70s, 80s. And I met him back in 2010. So he took me under his wing and was mentoring me professionally. And like I said, in 2014, 15 is when he started approaching me and telling me there was an opportunity. so,
So,
so yeah.
like you mentioned that it was not really part of your like thought process. Like you never were just like, oh, one day I have to own my own business or whatever. So I don't want to assume, but I gather from that that you weren't one of these people that's like, a lot of my friends that are entrepreneurs have been entrepreneurs since they were like toddlers, like ever since they could walk, they opened up the lemonade stand and, did all that. Was that part of your background
No,
where,
not at all. Not at
yeah.
all. Both my parents, though, are entrepreneurs. They both own their own businesses. So I do have a family, I guess, heritage or lineage of entrepreneurs. And I think one thing that entrepreneurs have is a niche to optimize things and make things better. There's a better way to do things. And that was definitely in my mindset and in my throughout my career. When I worked for other companies, I wanted to implement different things. So that had some impact.
Well, so, since you didn't have like sort of that background of, I guess, weren't wearing the entrepreneurial spirit on your sleeve, so to speak.
Yeah.
What do you think that Jim saw in you that made him like reach out to you specifically that was like, dude, you could start your own business. You could do this as a thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I met him in 2010, he called me into his office. He was starting to make the transition into retirement. He's the one that hired me at that particular company in 2010, and he, he was just point blank told me that he saw something in me. He never told me what it was, but he had. I think at one point he had about 100 employees under him. So over the years, he's seen a lot of engineers and had a lot of staff under him. But he said there was just something different about me, and he was hitting. He thought what was closer to the end of his life, and uh, he wanted to pass on everything that he had learned over the years, and he realized that it'd be a shame if he didn't hand that over to somebody. So I don't know. I think it was timing, but maybe also he saw my desire to learn. I like learning and
Mm-hmm.
and I like doing things well. So maybe that's what he
So, I
saw.
mean, okay, now this thing actually exists and you've had some pretty awesome success. And so I guess just, walk me through like getting from, all right, I'm starting, I didn't even really want this for myself, but here I am, into, getting to where you're running a really successful business. What was that journey like?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is in 2011, I did, like I mentioned earlier, I felt being led to eventually start my own company. Um, and I mentioned that to my piano teacher. I ran into her several years back. Well, in 2011, I hadn't seen her since like 2002, probably. So I hadn't seen her in 9 years. I went to visit my parents in West Texas, and that's where I'm from, El Paso. And she she asked me what I was up to and what I was doing for work and what my goals were. And I told her, yeah, I think I'm being led to start a company, but I don't know. And she said, well, you need to plant a seed. And she said, I don't know what that looks like, Jose, but you need to plant a seed. And so what I did that year was come up with a name, and I purchased a web domain. Those were the two things that I did. So, and I just filed it away. I planted that seed. That was 2011, and I didn't give it any thought after that. I had a name and I had a web domain. And then in 2014, when my mentor approached me, I already had that in the back pocket, but I didn't really think I could never own a company. That's not something that I it just seems so far fetched, especially at my age.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's interesting, I guess, like, as you reflect back on like, I would describe what you're saying is that it's like, hey man, Jose took step one and
Yeah,
then 3 years later he took step two.
yeah, that's
And
pretty
so
much
like,
what
I mean, I
happened.
guess just like, I mean, what was there, in that 3 years, was it just like after you took that action, was anything different? Was it like sort of in the back of your mind where you're just kind of like where you would go back to it now that you had actually done something? Or was it just kind of like, that's all it's in a drawer and, didn't even think about it until somebody said something later?
Yeah, I pretty much filed it away, and I didn't really give it a lot of thought until, again, my mentor started approaching me and pressing me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I started thinking about it more seriously, and okay, well, if I do this, I already have a name.
Hmm.
Um, so
Very cool, man. Very cool. And so like once, getting started, I think it's always, it sounds like you had a, good customer in, sort of from day one that kind of helped you get started with that project that he wanted you to do. And so what was it like getting the second project?
that was a little bit. It's neat. So some people have said, you never want to burn a bridge. So my previous employer, when I left on really good terms. And they were mainly doing Walmarts and Lowe's and a lot of what's known as site development, commercial retail centers and big industrial parks, things like that. And they didn't really venture into water, wastewater. And that's when I started the company. That's the very first project I did was a wastewater treatment plant. And that's the main focus of the company early on, right? Was water, wastewater. So that next project was they called me 2 months after I started the company and after I had left, and they said, "Hey Jose, we remember that project we had, and we were going to do a water plant. Well, we'd like for you to design it if you're interested." So that was the second project. Was my previous employer hiring me to do a water plant for them.
Whenever
So that
you,
was so it's
that
pretty
is
neat.
very,
It was pretty neat.
that is very cool. Well, and I think it's got to be a
Yeah.
test. I mean, I guess it has to make you feel good that, you know, a lot of people say that they leave on good terms, but I think that this is a little bit more proof that you really did leave on good terms. Obviously, if you're on bad terms, they're not going to call you up and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
we got some business we want to throw your way."
Yep.
What was their reaction whenever you told them that you were leaving to go do your own thing?
I mean, I think they were they were disappointed because they had I had spent I had worked 2 stints with them from 2008 2010, and then I went back from 2012 to 2014. So I had about 4.5 years working for them, and I liked them. I mean, I honestly saw myself retiring at that company. Um, but I had at that time I was wanting to help grow the office more on the municipal side, and on their end there wasn't really much interest, but they said if you want to pursue it, we'll support you in that, but we're not really going to be the drivers behind it. It's kind of be your own thing. And that's when my mentor approached me about that project. It just seemed like, well, I can either do it for myself or do it for somebody or for somebody else, right? And at that point, I'm like, well, I might as well just try it for myself. But my conversation was that with them was very it was good. I mean, I did an exit interview with them, and they asked me, Jose, you're a dead man out, so tell us, you spent a lot of time with us, tell us what the good and the bad was. And so I told them what I appreciated about them and how I respected them as a company, and I shared some areas of improvement that I thought, hey, if y'all fix these areas, I think y'all will do really well. And it was good. It was a good conversation. And I even asked them, what's some advice that you could give me now that I'm going off on my own, and they gave me some really good advice. And um, yeah, the main guy that owned the company at the time, his name is David Duplantis. He the piece of advice he gave me was very simple. He said, Jose, do what you say and you'll do well. And to this day, that's probably one of the hardest things for me to do is to do what I say. It's hard. It's really hard to follow on your word, especially when you're stretched in 100 different directions, pulled by different clients, and trying to project out how long stuff will take and being honest and upfront, and it's tough.
Well, it's tough, but it's like that honesty and
Yeah,
forthrightness, I think, is like the alternative is ridiculous, right? Where it's
yeah,
like, well, I'm just going to be deceptive and
exactly.
withholding. It's like that doesn't, that's not going to do any good for anybody.
Yeah.
So tell me about your company today. Like, I know that y'all are having a lot of success, but just kind of color it in for the people. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so we started out focusing on water and wastewater, like I mentioned, doing wastewater treatment plants, water plants. But I started getting calls from people who knew me from my site development days, doing Walmarts, Lowe's, and little retail centers. And I thought, well, I'll go ahead and start doing some of these. It's a good way to supplement the income and diversify a little bit. And eventually, we grew into doing water, wastewater, public infrastructure, as well as site development. And then more recently, within the last 2 years, we've added a third division, which is land development, and that's more focused on residential subdivisions and larger tracts of land, large industrial parks or things like that. So,
How
so that's
many
where we're at right now.
how many on the team?
So we've got 10, and we're hiring. So it's yeah, we've been growing. We've been trying to find office space for the last couple months. That's been kind of stressful. It's growing pains, but it's great. We're doing well. We're in a really healthy place, and there's a lot of work out there right now. And just trying to find the right people to add to our team. That's
So what was it like hiring? Like what were the circumstances under which you hired employee number two? I guess you were number one, and then it's like, at
yeah,
what point where you're like, all right, I need to bring in somebody else? Who was that? What kind
yeah.
of led to that
So
decision of,
that's
of
that's
growing
kind of
that way?
that's a wild story, but
Yeah.
so like I mentioned, we started the company, and I have a business partner, but he was a passive partner early on. I was the sweat equity, he was the capital equity. And so by 2000 so we started in February of 2015, and then around November of 2015, I was still by myself, just in a one desk office, and I got a call. Actually, it was a text message from an old drafter that I used to work with. Um, I hadn't talked to him in years, and I was at the point where I needed some help, and I didn't know what to do. I had never hired an employee. That was a big responsibility for a one-man shop to take on another salary, And so I get a text message, or it was actually a Facebook message, and he said, his name was Marcos, and he said, "Hey man, I'm in El Paso." Uh, just random message. He said, "What's the best taco place to eat at, or best Mexican food?" That was his message. So I replied. I said, "What are you doing over there?" And I pointed him in the right direction. Made some recommendations, and he said, "Well, I want to do my master's out here." He's like, "But I'll be back in Houston next week, and I won't start on my master's till February or something like that." I was like, "Oh, okay, well." Half jokingly, half serious, I sent him a message back, and I said, "Hey, well, I started my own company. Would you be interested in doing some drafting for me?" Wink, wink, like kind of joking. And he said, "Sure." And so he just the following week he brought his computer, and I bought a folding table, and I set it up in my one desk office and set it up right behind mine, and that was the start of our employee number one. And he ended up staying with me for about 2 years, close to 3 years actually, because the master's program that he was pursuing, they didn't get the funding until like 2 years or 3 years down the road, and so at that point he went and did his master's. So that was employee number one.
Earlier, you said, dude, never burn a bridge. And it's just like, you never know when, a great candidate's going to call and ask you for taco advice. And so it's, you know, it's freaking great, man. It's the, well, you said something earlier about how you actually could sort of foresee yourself as retiring at that company that you were working with. And I just kind of wonder what lessons you took away from working for somebody you saw as a really great employer. And, I mean, have you tried to copy any of that stuff in your own company? Like what lessons and values did you take from your previous company into the one that you started?
Yeah, I think so. That particular company, they valued their people. Um, I mean, their employees weren't just commodities or like a computer or a printer. They were people that had,
Well, so like just what before you move on from
yeah.
that, like what exactly did that mean? Because it's like I think that everybody's like, hey, people are our biggest asset, and you obviously really felt that. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious, what did that company do that made you feel that way?
So I'll give you an example. So when I started working for them in 2008, that's around the time we had the big downturn in the economy, and it was bad. I mean, people were losing jobs left and right, and they decided for the first round to simply uh, the I guess the executive team to take pay cuts so that they didn't have to lay off any people. So that showed. I mean, they could very well have laid off people round one, but they chose to take pay cuts instead of laying people off. And they held on to me as long as they could. I worked for them till 2010 until finally they had to let go of me, um, just because of financial issues that they were uh, dealing with. Uh, and
It's a tough
then,
time to be, it's a tough time to be a civil engineer.
oh yeah,
My brother
okay,
is a structural engineer, and right around that time, he ended up moving to Saudi Arabia
yeah,
because, to, do the expat thing just because there was
yeah,
not a lot of work available.
yeah. Yeah, so I think that was something that I learned how they valued their people. They didn't just say it; they really meant it. And simple things like taking the office out to lunch. That's something that my office manager did quite frequently, and it was something small, but it was it was team building, and two, it was a way to appreciate your employees with a simple meal. That went a long ways. So I think those things were huge, and then just being respectful of people's lives outside of work. Like, yeah, I have my employees, and yes, we're a business, and we need to be profitable. We gotta fulfill our commitments and meet deadlines and things like that. But then also, you got to balance that out with, hey, people have lives outside of work. This isn't everything, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I guess what is y'all's like? Is everybody remote? Is anybody remote? Y'all all working together? Like, what's the kind of work from home status at the
Yeah,
place?
we have the ability to work remote if need be. So there's times when people will say, "Hey, I'm going to work remote tomorrow," and that's fine. Um, I think long term working remotely, we've realized that it's very easy to lose touch with people and lose contact and lose that sense of team and camaraderie and all of that by working remotely. And then just our field in general, it's very hands-on, and just having those hallway conversations are so crucial and important for development, for people to learn. Sometimes a young engineer might overhear a conversation I'm having with another, seasoned engineer, and just by simply being there present, they're learning, and they're gleaning from that knowledge and wisdom. Whereas if they're working remote, you got to set up a Teams call or a Zoom call to go through a quick little question, right?
Well, yeah, I
So
mean, it just there's that, and then also like you don't whenever you're walking around in the hallway, you as a leader, you overhear something or whatever, and it's like you've been there longer than anybody, and so you might have some historical perspective that there's some of the team needs, and you're not listening in on their Zoom calls, and you're not in their sitting next to them in their house listening to all these things where you might have an opportunity to step in and teach.
yep, that's right. Yeah, so it's I mean, you gotta be flexible on that end with working remote, of course. Um, so that's where we're at as well. We respect when people have, hey, I've got the AC people come in to fix something at my house. Is it okay if I work from home? It's like, yeah, of course. I mean, it's not an issue.
Well, I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you about is I know that you as a kind of a small company working with a lot of companies that are really really big. Like, you know, do you ever find that overwhelming where you're working with a company like Lowe's or like this big gigantic publicly traded multi-billion-dollar companies working with you guys and it's just 10 people.
Yeah, yeah.
What is that like?
I mean, it can get intimidating. I think, but as long as we're following through with the work, or we're able to do what we say, it's not an issue. I mean, I haven't done work with Walmart or Lowe's directly since we started the company. But for example, that water plant that I did, that was for a Walmart development. And so I was a two-man shop at the time, doing a water plant and trying to meet their schedules and their requirements, and that was stressful, and it can be intimidating, as you mentioned. But um,
Well, I
yeah,
think that the whole do what you say, and then it's just like, really, doesn't matter who your customer is. Ultimately, they just want you to deliver on whatever it is that you say that you're going to give them. And
that's
so,
correct. Yeah.
that by itself will probably keep you out of a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah, just following through and not taking on stuff that you can't really do, right? Um, in fact, earlier this year, I had been pursuing a particular client for many years, and he finally gave me an opportunity. And he said, "Hey, I've got these small projects if you're interested." And we were just overloaded, and I couldn't. They were small projects, and I knew what he was trying to do. He wanted to test me on the small things to prove myself, and then he'd feed me something big. But I just, we were overloaded, and I had to be really frank. I said, you've, I've been trying to work with you for the last 3 years, but I'm just going to have to be really honest with you. I cannot follow through with these small projects right now. I can't give you the attention that you deserve and that this project requires. And I was trying to be honest and upfront, and it was a bummer because he said, "Well, Jose, I was actually not calling to follow up on those. I was actually giving you a big one." And I was like, "Oh man," but it was the right thing to do. I mean, we
Yeah,
at,
I
at
mean,
that
well,
time,
it's, the again, it's like, look at the alternative, and it's just like, what are we going to do? Show up and do a bad job? We're going
yeah,
to not be able to deliver on this. So, well, so I guess the last question I want to ask is this: is that you, now having the benefit of being an entrepreneur whenever maybe you weren't didn't feel like you were one whenever you grew up. Is there anything that you look back at now and you sort of saw, like looking with the benefit of hindsight, you kind of see the signs where you're like, man, now I understand why I was this way. Is there anything in your life leading up to that entrepreneurial leap that you look back at and understand yourself a little better now?
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think maybe deep down I had watched my parents be entrepreneurs, and so I did have that in the back of my mind, but I didn't really give it a lot of thought. But I think it was always there. I just hadn't really given a lot of thought. It wasn't at the forefront, right? But it was in the back. It was in the background. So I think um, I think too. Sometimes you just have to do it. Um, I questioned whether I had the knowledge, expertise to be an entrepreneur. I thought, well, maybe I need to go get an MBA and understand the business side of things before I go off and start my own company. And luckily, my mentor told me, he said, Jose, if you go get an MBA, change degree paths, go be a finance guy. You don't need an MBA. So he really encouraged me in that. Um, and I think also always trying to find ways to do things more efficiently or a better way. I think that's something that's in every entrepreneur. I mean, that's why you have a niche to go off on your own or go start a company or a business, because you have an idea and you think there's a better way to do it. And I mean, I tell my employees all the time. I said, if there's a better way to do it, please tell me, sell me on it, and we'll implement it. I hate the thought process that people have. Well, why do we do it this way? Because it's the way it's always been done. I hate that. If there's a better way, sell me on it, and we'll change it. We'll optimize. We'll be more efficient. And I think that's also something that is I've learned about myself.
Mhm. Well, I appreciate you sharing that wisdom with us today, man. Really appreciate it. Very cool story. And in the event that somebody wants to find you because they're, looking for great tacos in El Paso, or they are looking to, join your amazing team, or just to get in touch with you, where can folks find you?
Yeah, so just our website, all of our contact info is on there, venturiengineers.com, or they can add me as a contact on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active and responsive on LinkedIn, so I think those two avenues.
Yeah,
And
very cool, man.
yeah,
Well, it's I thank you again for joining us. Thanks for making doing the work that you do behind the scenes to make all of our lives a little bit better. And so civil engineers, the unsung heroes of society. You know, like one of the, I don't remember if you, I don't know if they told you this whenever, if you were in the same class or whatever they told, I don't remember
Yeah.
what it was, but especially with like wastewater, they're like, civil engineers have saved more
Yes,
lives than anyone else in the history of the world because
it's
of,
true.
sewage treatment,
Yeah,
right?
it's
So,
true.
yeah.
Yeah, there's
Well,
actually a really good book called The Ghost Map about
uh-huh.
E. coli and
Hmm.
an outbreak, and it's all about that. It's just
Yeah.
you know
Well, it's all right. Well, I appreciate you chipping in and doing your part and making sure that is not a big problem for us living in the modern age. So,
yeah.
anyway, well, Jose, thank you very much. Those of you who are listening, we really appreciate you joining. I hope that you found this valuable. Hope that you will take up Jose on his offer to connect and learn. So, Jose, again, thanks very much and appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.